Hello everyone, welcome to version 1.1 of my Resident Evil 4 Remilk, Professional difficulty. No damage, no New Game Plus items, no charms, no merchant, worse through. This will cover chapters 7 through 12, and we are starting off in the really boring, repetitive, and stale water room area. And at least this time around, I have a bit more shotgun shells, so I won't have to be so over-reliant upon the exploit where I just run back to the previous area, leash the enemies, and then punish their running animation, and then stab them or do whatever, so that I can bypass their transformations and the like. Although none of these enemies actually transform. I think only one shield guy transforms, and then another shield guy transforms. I don't remember what other enemy transforms, but I gotta say, it was a bit of a misconception on my part to think that every single enemy on this sequence transforms. I mean, it's only two enemies, and then in the bottom level, all but one guy transforms. So that at least cleared up that bit of confusion on my end. I mean, I already figured this out a while ago, but I'm only now just saying it. But it still doesn't change the fact that this is still a very boring sequence, and with how dumb the entire combat sequence is, with the number of enemies that you're dealing with the number of crossbow guys you're dealing with actually stupid AI, you're just better off resorting to this kind of method unless you have a lot of upgraded weaponry and flash grenades and all this other stuff, because that's just how this pre-alpha likes to roll with using the merchant like that. And yes, I'm well aware that I have plenty of shotgun shells to take out the enemies. I can isolate them, I can do other methods to dispatch them, but I still don't feel like this in any way validates the whole idea of this pre-alpha being well-designed at this kind of baseline. It really doesn't feel like that at all, and it's hard to properly elaborate on the way the merchant is just badly utilized in this pre-alpha unless I go to my retrospective and I just write all this down. And I still have yet to get to my Resident Evil 4 Remilk retrospective, because I'm still working on my Shadows of Rose DLC retrospective, and I have done the commentary and the music for the Shadows of Rose DLC retrospective, but I still haven't gotten to the video footage yet because I've been busy with classes, and I might get a breather at some point to contribute to the review. In fact, maybe today I can actually contribute some time to the retrospective of the Shadows of Rose DLC. So after I get this commentary done, I will definitely get started on the video footage. It's just this kind of stuff takes quite a while to do, and even though I have recorded all of the Shadows of Rose DLC, I feel like there may be certain points where I have to go back to the Shadows of Rose DLC to re-record gameplay to better help visualize the information I'm laying out in my review, and I also need to play other Resident Evil games to get additional video footage during the filler moments of my retrospective. And I also need to make sure that I save all that video footage for later retrospectives. That was definitely a big mistake that I made when I finished my Resident Evil Village retrospective. Rather than saving all that video footage onto an external hard drive, I just deleted it all, and I didn't really consider the possibility of reusing all that footage for later retrospectives. So that's definitely a mistake I'll need to rectify in the future when I get to the Shadows of Rose DLC retrospective and my Resident Evil 4 Remilk retrospective. And I still wonder how long my retrospective of Resident Evil 4 Remilk will be, because, I mean, somebody joked that it might be like 20 hours long, but who knows, maybe it could be that long, because of how irredeemable a lot of the sections are, and how this pre-alpha is the worst Resident Evil game I've ever played, the worst remake of a game I've ever played, and the worst game I've ever played in my entire life. And obviously with that high level of lacking quality, the length of my retrospective has to match that, so I expect that my Resident Evil 4 Remilk retrospective will be significantly longer than my Resident Evil Village retrospective, and that retrospective was almost 7 hours long, so I definitely think the length of my Resident Evil 4 Remilk retrospective will probably be like 15 hours. That's a rough estimate I'm giving right now with the length of that retrospective. It wouldn't surprise me in the slightest. And I've already talked ad nauseum about the numerous problems with Resident Evil 4 Remilk in my blind playthrough, in my first worst through, in my second worst through, and in this worst through that you're seeing right now. And I am going to be doing another worst through just to go through the game / pre-alpha again with the merchant, just to improve upon the strategies that I already laid out. and to further strengthen the validity of my statements against this pre-alpha, and that is how that will go, and that's all I really have to say about that. And right now, the sequence is still going on. I'm taking the time to dispatch the enemies, and I should have just left these two alone, but I decided to deal with them because I wasn't thinking. These guys will transform into Plaga, and I was not willing to waste a flash grenade right here, so I just leave them behind, and then I just retreat back to the previous room. Or actually, I don't retreat back to the previous room immediately. I just get on the crank and then just turn it, because when you are on the upper level and you turn that crank, the crossbow guys will not shoot you for some reason. It's very odd, but I do make a save after that because of how badly designed the double switch sequence with Ashley is. And it's definitely why in the earlier chapters of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, you have to spend less time using your pistol, because you need a lot of pistol ammo if you're going to survive this stupid sequence, because they put so many enemies in that sequence. Like, so many of the enemies are just going after Ashley, and she's just standing around letting the enemies grab her because she's that retarded and that stupid, and that's somehow meant to contribute to a supposedly difficult experience. As some retard said in a comment before I ultimately banned him and just saved his comment for later, just to laugh at it, because there's no way a human being wrote this kind of comment. You can't rationalize with these kind of morons. You can't rationalize with these kind of toxic fans who come up with the most ridiculous explanations ever for defending a section or defending a bad AI system. But putting that aside, alongside these factors with Ashley's stupid AI, you also have the enemies grabbing onto her, and for some reason, the developers lost all form of common sense when they designed the hit reaction on the enemies when they're grabbing onto Ashley, because they don't flinch whatsoever. They only flinch after like 5 shots, and even with a high-powered weapon like a sniper rifle, it can take like 3 shots to get them to drop Ashley, and you're forced to aim for the legs because of how awkward the shooting is on this pre-alpha when you're having to deal with the focus reticle system, the weapon sway, the projectile-based nature of the bullets, and you're constantly having to aim for the legs to ensure that you don't hit Ashley at all. And it's just very, very awkward that they would favor this, and it's just so artificial and contrived to make it where the enemies don't react to your bullets whatsoever when they're in the process of picking up Ashley and just walking away with her. It makes no logical sense whatsoever. They're not paying attention to Leon. They're not doing anything to strengthen their defenses or anything. They're just casually walking away, and they're not reacting to your shot. It's like they designed it this way to force you to use the knife execution, because when new Capcom read comments from people saying they wanted a knife execution whenever enemies were grabbing onto Ashley, they gave them that, but at the same time, they decided to put in this troll feature where they don't react to your bullets whatsoever. It's almost like they designed that mechanic in such a way to express their hatred towards the fans and all the people who were annoyed by that lack of a feature in Resident Evil 4 OG, and that is just so retarded of the developers. That is just so wrong on so many levels to treat a mechanic like that and just compromise your gameplay experience. And when you decide to arbitrarily remove flinch animations on enemies when they're picking up your AI companion to force you to rely upon the knife execution animation, yet you can't use the knife execution animation on this part because Ashley's up on the 2nd level, what the hell are you trying to accomplish with that? Did they not think that through? And even with certain weapons, like the sniper rifle or the riot gun, or even with like high damage upgrades on your weaponry, you're still going to encounter these kind of issues. And even when you successfully break Ashley out of a grab, she just stands there because she has to go through some kind of recovery animation where she has to waste time standing up. And even when she does stand up, the game still registers her as being grabbed by the enemy. You have to wait for the little icon of her to appear in the bottom right of your screen to know that she's about to run for the switches and that she's back in a neutral state. But even when that icon appears, she's still very slow to start moving. Like, why is she so sluggish? I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense. I don't understand what the hell they were thinking with these kind of contrived artificial designs to compromise the gameplay experience of Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And we're starting the double switch sequence right now, so I kill the first couple of enemies with the pistol, and I always kill the first guy first. It's always important to do that because that first guy will always be close to picking up Ashley, but when you kill him, by the time the other enemies appear, Ashley will have already turned that lever, and she's going to get grabbed, and the enemy behavior is so strange because if they're on one side of the arena, they're forced to take Ashley to the other side of the arena. I assume they designed it this way to give the player the opportunity to shoot the enemies, but just look how stupid this looks. And then you have all the enemies surrounding her, so she's going to be standing there, not trying to move out of the way or anything, and they're able to ignore any kind of flinch animations. I mean, this is why you need a fuck ton of pistol ammo, because there are just so many enemies here. It's just ridiculous that they put in this many enemies into a pre-alpha that has some of the worst flinch animation systems I have ever seen. And it just comes across as broken. It just comes across as unfinished. It's like I'm back in an alpha stage with how bad these animations look and with how much they compromise the gameplay experience. And I know some moron's just gonna say, oh, you're overreacting, oh, you're just being such a whiny baby or anything. But that's just them pulling arguments out of thin air without understanding the context of what I'm saying, and they're just focusing on all the wrong aspects of my voice, of what I'm saying, and all this other stuff, and that's just how dumb the Resident Evil fanbase is. It's objectively a very bad design choice, and you're not going to see it here, obviously. You're obviously going to see more of this in my poor designs, a Resident Evil 4 Remilk series, and my blind playthrough, and all these other videos that I've made, but they don't even bother looking at these videos before they make these kind of stupid statements. Like I said, just ignore these kind of people if you're a walkthrough maker like me, or you're someone who actually takes games seriously. Because these people just don't know what the hell they're talking about. And they really try to jump through so many hoops to ensure that they try to win whatever feeble argument they present to you. And right there, that enemy was about to grab onto Ashley, so I got rid of him. And I'm very fortunate that there aren't that many enemies around. I don't know why I'm not seeing more enemies appearing right now. I have no idea how the enemy spawn here works. Is it infinite? Is it not infinite? Like, how do you dictate where the enemies spawn from? It doesn't make any sense. Like, how do you control the spawn here? It doesn't make any sense how they've designed the sequence. Like, they haven't designed the sequence in such a way that it complements the fundamental framework of the gameplay. Why would they put in this many enemies when their fundamental designs with the stun systems and with Ashley's AI are not complementary to the number of enemies you're dealing with? It doesn't make any sense at all. We've gotten past that stupid, dumb sequence. That's one of the worst sequences I've ever gone through in a Resident Evil game by far. Or in this case, not a game, because this is a pre-alpha. And now we're on Chapter 8, so this is all very simple. Just follow this path exactly like how I'm doing it. If you stay in that back area before triggering the cutscene that showcases the Red Zilla doing his fantasy garbage, you can actually shoot at the enemies and they won't respond to you. I don't know why this is a thing, but it's just very unusual behavior. Use it to your advantage to dispatch some enemies so that you can safely dispatch the Red Zilla without being alerted to the enemies. Of course, in my case, I can't do that because I have to save up on as much ammunition as possible, because the later sequences are going to drain me of so much ammunition, given how badly handled they are. And we're making our way over to the castle wall sequence, where we have to deal with that El Gigante and all of these enemies. And in this recording, I'm going to be able to utilize the skip where you hit a counterweight on the other side of a gate to bypass the gate. Only I'm not going to be using a grenade, I'm going to be using a pistol shot. So after seeing a couple of videos from other individuals, I know how to do it now. I don't think I do it correctly in this video, but I still nail it in the end. So the gate that you're able to bypass is on the upper level right over here. So you climb the ladder, and the spot where I'm going to stand will allow me to see the column that's protruding from the wall a bit. So I'm going to be able to shoot over this column and aim for the hitbox of the counterweight, because even though I can't see the counterweight, the actual hitbox of the counterweight is larger than the actual model. So I'm able to hit the counterweight with the pistol shot, and now I'm going to be able to bypass these enemies. And it's best to use a flash grenade right here, but unfortunately I don't have any flash grenades worth using at this moment. I'm trying to save up on them right now for the double Garador encounter in Chapter 10, but I'm able to get past them on this attempt, and now I'm going to be able to get past the El Gigante right over here. So normally I have to wait for the El Gigante to throw his projectiles before going through the entrance, but this time he decided to throw his projectiles earlier, so I'm able to get past him very quickly and just hide behind this debris right over here and dispatch the enemies that are right here. So they're dead. Now I'm going to be able to dispatch the crossbow guys, and the methodology you have to use in order to get the El Gigante to throw projectiles at the area in front of you so that you can safely dispatch the crossbow guys is really stupid. This is one of the main factors that really contributes to me not understanding why they place these crossbow guys here. Why would they set up the placement in such a way that you're forced to try to get the El Gigante to throw debris right in front of you so that you can dispatch the crossbow guys? And not only that, if these crossbow guys flinch in such a way that they're flinching forward, they can fall off the ledge and set up right in that spot where I shot that crossbow guy just then. So they can punish you when you're trying to drop down, and if you decide to shoot the crossbow guys, you will not have enough time because the El Gigante will have already thrown his projectiles at that point. It's like, what the hell is wrong with the developers for putting those crossbow guys there? And it's clear they want you to use the sniper rifle, but it still doesn't take away from the fact that you have to game the system to get the El Gigante to throw his projectiles in the area in front of you. I mean, I know there's like a bit of cover that you can take cover behind in the front area, and you can dispatch the crossbow guys and take cover from the El Gigante that way, but it's not that safe of an option because the hitboxes on the projectiles that the El Gigante uses are not very good, and they can actually hit you behind cover sometimes. And it's just such a dumb sequence, and having gotten past those guys, I'm now going to be able to use the cannon against the El Gigante and against any stragglers, and that will be the end of Chapter 8, which is such a dumb chapter, and I don't understand why they decided to favor this kind of scenario for Chapter 8. Why on earth would Salazar employ an El Gigante throwing pieces of his castle at intruders as a defense mechanism? This guy is supposed to have respect for his castle, right? I mean, this castle has been in his family for generations, and he's using an El Gigante that's tearing up bits and pieces of his castle and using them as debris in order to destroy other parts of his castle. And the music is also over the top as well. Like, I don't understand the choice of pacing here. I don't understand the choice of screenplay and all this other stuff. Like, why is it so over the top and nonsensical and silly? And then they want to make the pacing even more confusing when immediately after that over-the-top sequence, you get some kind of heart-to-heart moment between Leon and Ashley that's done very poorly with its voice acting and also with Ashley's reasoning for thinking that she might hurt Leon, even though she's seen Leon deal with how many Ganado at this point? She's really worried that she will hurt Leon. Are you serious, Ashley? I mean, the pacing is so bad in this part, and there are other moments like this throughout Resident Evil 4 Remilk that do not make any sense with the screenplay, the character portrayals, and just the scenario designs that they favor. It's so dumb. Like, the scenarios that you went through after Ashley is captured in Chapter 3-1 of Resident Evil 4 OG make so much more sense, and they aren't so over the top and silly, and they don't detract from the setup that you're going to get with Leon and Ashley later on when they reunite in Chapter 3-4. Like, why on earth would the developers of Resident Evil 4 Remilk favor the kind of designs that they favored? It's so dumb. And then with this maze sequence right here for Chapter 9, the maze is so overly linear. There's only ever like one specific path to go, and some minor divergences that don't exactly make the path confusing or anything. And then you have so many colmillos in this part that slow the gameplay down, so you're having to waste time slowing yourself down to dispatch these enemies that barely make any noise when they're running through the maze. They get stuck on the geometry all the time, and I've seen so many moments of this happening where the colmillos are just running into walls when I'm trying to search for them because they haven't decided to come after me for some reason. And then you have their really stupid grab animations, because the grabs that the colmillos have so much phantom range in front of them and to their sides. It's some of the worst detection I have ever seen on a grab by far. And then you have their really stupid mutations where even though their mutation is literally a parasite coming out of their back, for some reason, this allows them to gain even more health than usual, regenerate all the HP they previously lost when they weren't transformed, and also be heavily resilient to flinch animations. And this just makes them even more bullshit as an enemy, and the only way you're going to flinch this enemy at that point is to shoot them out of the air. It's just really, really stupid and retarded with the way they designed this entire maze sequence, and with the way they utilized the colmillos in this entire part. What an absolutely disappointing sequence, and I still don't understand why Leon chooses to bring Ashley with him when he knows that there are threats around, and why doesn't he just leave her back in the safe room where it's safe? I mean, she's stayed there for a bit of time before Leon reunited with her. Why would that not be a safe place to put Ashley, to allow Leon to fulfill the objective of the maze, which is to find those 3 switches, which is a very mundane objective at best? And then after the threats are dealt with in the maze, you can then bring Ashley along to do that co-op moment where she has to open that gate for you. I mean, you would spare the player of any moment where her AI is being really stupid, any moment where the colmillos are being really stupid as well, and they just choose to blindside Ashley out of the blue. I mean, there's just so many ways they could have made the sequence so much better, but they didn't. They chose a lazier option with the maze sequence. But we're now doing the Amaduro section, and this section isn't so bad. I'm going to be utilizing the deflections to my advantage to instantly remove the helmets and expose the parasites. But I will say, though, you have to be at a distance when you are going for the deflections, because the detection on the deflections has very sporadic detection the closer you are to the Amaduros. And because you're far away from the Amaduros when they initiate their attacks, the game / pre-alpha is able to detect the deflections a lot better. It's very odd, and it's a similar issue with Krauser as well. Krauser has the exact same problem where the closer you are to him, the more spotty the detection can be on the deflections. It's very, very bizarre that this is the case. But once you dispatch an Amaduros, you've got to get rid of the other one very quickly, because Ashley can choose to use one of the blue flames against the Amaduros, and you do not want her to waste blue flames, and she only utilizes the blue flames whenever an enemy attacks. So right now, this part of Ashley's programming is active. So when an Amaduro chooses to attack me, she's going to immediately throw a lantern at the Amaduro that attacked me. So I'm going to lure the rest of the enemies into the blue flames to stun them and then immediately kick them. And I'm going to use a flash grenade against them. And this final wave right here, there's going to be 3 of them. So once again, try to set yourself up in such a way that they will be very close to where she will throw the lantern. Pick your Amaduro wisely to ensure that you can easily cluster them together. And she's going to throw the blue flames. They're frozen, so I'm going to start kicking them. And these blue flames last for quite a while, which is good. But none of this takes away from how fantastical everything feels with the kind of effects the crimson flames and the blue flames elicit on the Plagas. Like, why did the developers favor this kind of route? Why would they favor this kind of fantastical interpretation on the Plagas now? Like, why have we never seen this kind of effect demonstrated in Resident Evil 4 and Resident Evil 5? Like, if this was never demonstrated, because obviously it makes realistic sense for Flames to not do the kind of things that they can do on the Plagas in this pre-alpha, why would they favor this model? Like, how the hell do the Crimson Flames allow the formation of a sound wave to trigger instant transformations in the enemies and just allow the Plagas to fully mature and just grow out of the heads? And how do the blue flames freeze the Plagas completely? It's just so dumb, and it's just so disrespectful to the original lore of the Plagas set up in Resident Evil 4 and then expanded upon further in Resident Evil 5 and in Resident Evil Damnation. And when the developers are going to be treating their own lore with that level of disrespect, that's just unforgivable. It really is. And you can't understand just how much I was so pissed off by how fantastical everything felt with the Crimson Flames and the Blue Flames, unless you watch my blind playthrough. I go into far greater detail, and I show far more genuine emotion and just far more disgust with what they did with the Plagas in Resident Evil 4 Remilk after going through Chapter 9. It's just insulting as a Resident Evil player to see the Plagas expressed this way. And just imagine how fantastical the mutations would be in Resident Evil 5 Remilk. Can you imagine what it would be like fighting Wesker? Do you have any idea how much of a joke he would be? Do you have any idea how much it would take you out of the experience seeing the mutations the way they might be in Resident Evil 5 Remilk? I mean, this is just seriously the worst possible way they could have reimagined the Plagas. What were they thinking? It's like they really view the Plagas as being like something out of fantasy or something out of folklore or like alien life forms. What the hell is wrong with the developers? They're confusing science fiction and fantasy at this point, and it just goes to show how detached they are from their own lore. I mean, it's not even for a story reason that they've decided to put in these Crimson Flames and Blue Flames, because if it was for a story reason, we would have seen these effects demonstrated again after Chapter 12 when we get to the island area in Chapter 13. And we also forget about the black liquid, and we also forget about Ashley being forced to drink that black liquid, and all of that is completely forgotten about when they get to the radiation area and the Plaga is just removed from Ashley. But, like, what about the black liquid, guys? The black liquid is still coursing through Ashley right now, and as we saw in the file just before Vertigo's area, the black liquid on its own is able to elicit detrimental effects on the people who drink it. So why have we completely forgotten about that all of a sudden when we get to the island area of Resident Evil 4 Remilk? And going back to the Crimson and Blue Flames, the only time in Resident Evil history that we have ever seen such a strong effect elicited by fire on BOWs is in Resident Evil 5. Because in Resident Evil 5, the Ouroboros virus has a huge vulnerability to fire. all the BOWs made from the Ouroboros virus had a very huge vulnerability to fire. That actually makes sense realistically. But what they have done with the Crimson and Blue Flames doesn't make any sense realistically. And what are they trying to do with this? Are they trying to set up the Ouroboros virus in such a way that it utilizes characteristics from the Plagas in Resident Evil 4 Remilk? And so this built-in effect that the Plagas have with fire is built into the Ouroboros virus in Resident Evil 5 Remilk. Like, what? That's not gonna make any sense with the lore whatsoever. The Ouroboros virus has nothing to do with the Plagas. Are they trying to seriously link the Ouroboros virus to the Plagas for their potential Resident Evil 5 Remilk? What is wrong with the fucking developers? Why would they do that? Oh my lord. It is so funny thinking about it. Like, you know another thing that doesn't make sense about the Crimson Flames and the Blue Flames? Like, the Crimson Flames in particular, they're designed around initiating a sonic pulse to cause Plagas to emerge from the body without any need for physical trauma. Like, why would they need to do that when they already set up in Chapter 7? That whole moment where a Ganado slit his own throat, dealing enough physical trauma to cause a parasite to emerge from his body, but also the whole point of these Plagas is to serve as like sleeper agents, even though, I mean, you can already tell from the way the Ganados designs are that they have the red eyes and the disfigurements with their skin and all these other things that make them look very conspicuous as infected individuals. So I guess the whole idea of the Crimson Flames is likely as some kind of countermeasure against intruders to immediately cause the Plagas to emerge from the bodies. But like, they could just have them slit their own throats. Like, why would they need to use Crimson Flames at that point? It makes absolutely no sense. And also, the Blue Flames. The Blue Flames cause the parasites to freeze entirely, but why would Sadler even be looking into that? And why would Salazar be looking into this as well? Like, why would these individuals who revere the Plaga be searching for these kind of properties that freeze the Plagas entirely? Like, isn't that detrimental to their plans? Or like, why would they use it though? Like, why would they need to look up the effects of Blue Flames? And if these Blue Flames are triggered under very specific circumstances that don't seem readily available to American personnel, since they are trying to invade America in this pre-alpha, and, you know, other countries as well, why does it matter finding this blue flame? And why would they have it down in the dungeon area? Why would they have blue flame lanterns set up? Like, were there some problems with the Plaga where, for some reason, they started rebelling against their leaders, even though that shouldn't be possible because of the hive mind? Yet again, this doesn't make any sense. I'm considering all this, even though I don't even work for New Capcom. Yet, professional developers working for a AAA corporation can't think of these kind of story scenarios that don't make any sense before actually implementing a story idea, which again doesn't feel like a story idea because the idea of the Crimson Flames, the Blue Flames, and the Black Liquid are all just completely forgotten about once we get to Chapter 13. So yeah, I'm going to go insane just trying to comprehend all this stupid information. And remember what I said before in my previous worst-throughs about the storytelling being just as bad as Resident Evil Village's storytelling, but I actually said before that the storytelling in Resident Evil 4 Remilk is actually worse than Resident Evil Village's storytelling. Just saying all of that and just comprehending this information, I am definitely set in my belief that the storytelling in Resident Evil 4 Remilk is infinitely worse than the storytelling in Resident Evil Village. And I already mentioned before that I'm a lot more harsh against the storytelling in Resident Evil 4 Remilk because of the fact that it's a remake of another game, if you want to call it that. And so you'd assume that these story beats would be expanded upon further, or they would actually refine some confusing elements from the story in the original version of Resident Evil 4. But all they've done is just add so much more confusion into the mix by adding all of these lore points that don't serve a fucking purpose. I just cannot believe that the story of Resident Evil 4 OG, which was constructed over the span of 2 weeks, as Shinji Mikami said, because they ran out of time, could somehow be better designed than a story that was built over the span of years, I would assume. But it totally feels like the story of Resident Evil 4 Remilk was constructed over the span of 6 hours or less. That's how bad this pre-alpha is, when they can't even do something as simple as look back at several pages of their script to actually see if what they're about to say later on in the later parts of the script will actually make sense. Oh, dear lord. This is seriously mind-boggling. I cannot believe developers could be this incompetent. so far below the baseline level of incompetency, which I'm going to reiterate on for the millionth time. I'm just going to stop right there, because I think I've said enough on this absolute travesty of a story, honestly. But now we have this really stupid navisador section, where they decided to put in so many navisador for no reason. And I get that this area is directly above the nest, but I would expect a lot more navisadors under the nest, like on the nest, in Chapter 11, not here. Why would there be this many of them? And even if you want so many enemies, it still has to be just enough to complement the fundamental framework of gameplay, for crying out loud. But they put so many navisador here that don't fit the kind of crappy combat framework that they've set up, that you're forcing the player to rely upon exploits all the time, or just rely upon high-powered weaponry. And of course, I don't have that at the moment. And even if I did have access to the merchant, it would still take way too long, and I would still be using the same exploits, because the gameplay just really falls apart when you're dealing with so many navisador. And it just makes for a drawn-out sequence that can be like 15 to 30 minutes long, depending on your loot and depending on the path you choose to take through the navisador encounter. And that is their idea of engaging gameplay to justify replayability. It's those kind of sequences that make you wonder if they even designed this pre-alpha to be played more than once. And now we have this Garador encounter, which I got on the first try. And at the time of this recording, that totally surprised me, because there are so many ways this encounter is so badly designed, and you have to ensure that you don't kill too many enemies at the start, otherwise more enemies will spawn in, and they put in way too many enemies. I don't understand the justification for putting in so many enemies into what's essentially a stealth encounter with Garador. But when I used the assault rifle against the Garador, I was genuinely surprised that I was dealing as much damage as I was dealing. And the only reason I had some kind of hint that the assault rifle was decent against the Garadors was because I watched Master KD do a run of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, and he used the assault rifle against the Garadors, and I believe it was slightly upgraded, but he was able to kill them very quickly. But it's still not enough to use just the assault rifle. You do have to use the flash grenade as well when their parasites are exposed to deal significant damage to them, then use the assault rifle to finish them off. But either way, you're still going to be dealing with very awkward designs, because at any moment, you could get screwed by bad hit detection on the weak spots. You could get screwed by the Garadors just omnisciently knowing where you are. You could get screwed by the enemies and their bad designs. Like, there's still going to be a lot of awkward gameplay in the mix when you're trying to control the enemy behavior. You're trying to navigate the area in such a way that you can kind of manipulate where the enemies go, but it's all so clunky that the chances of you being screwed by poor designs is exceedingly high, even with the assault rifle. And this still doesn't excuse the amount of stupidity I had to deal with that stupid encounter when I first went through it, or in my previous worst through of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, trying to figure it out, and I was just spending hours upon hours trying to get the sequence done, and it just felt like they wanted you to spam flash grenades like crazy or use the rocket launchers, when all along they want you to use the assault rifle, which for some reason uses sniper rifle ammo. And I know that smartasses want to say that, oh, it says rifle ammo, so you have to assume it applies to all rifle ammo types. Well, have these people not played the original Resident Evil 4? Have they not played other Resident Evil games that have had sniper rifles and assault rifles? In those games, rifle ammo was not just rifle ammo. You had sniper rifle ammo. You had assault rifle ammo. Sniper rifle ammo and assault rifle ammo were mutually exclusive ammo types. They were not the same ammunition type. So, for some reason, out of the blue, New Capcom decided to make rifle ammo a generalized ammo type that applies to different rifles in the game, not just like sniper rifle ammo. Yet, for some reason, they decided to use the same model for the sniper rifle ammo from Resident Evil 4 OG and apply it to the rifle ammo in this pre-alpha. So obviously, with my prior experience with Resident Evil 4, I would make the reasonable deduction that the rifle ammo in this pre-alpha is only for sniper rifles, and assault rifles would just get their own separate ammunition type, but for some reason, it's not the case at all in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And referencing those smartasses again, they wanted to use the argument of, in the real world, sniper rifle ammunition and assault rifle ammunition are of a very similar caliber with each other, which is why they can use the same ammunition type. But why are you applying that realism to a game? I can appreciate when realism is applied to certain mechanics, but not to the overall game. And when you're applying realism to certain mechanics, I would expect that to be applied to hit reaction on weaponry. But apparently new Capcom was more concerned with the realistic aspect of rifle ammo corresponding to sniper rifle ammo and assault rifle ammunition, even though this is not how the ammunition types were ever designated in the previous Resident Evil games. Rather than actually applying realistic feedback to their weaponry and building a better gameplay experience around that actually screamed creativity, rather than the shallow, stale, repetitive mess that we got with this pre-alpha. Yeah, that argument by itself just collapses on its own with these assholes who decide to make that kind of comment. But to get back on track, even if I were to have used the assault rifle against the Garadors in the earlier days of Resident Evil 4 Remilk, I would not have amassed a lot of ammo because at the time, I didn't even know that rifle ammo could correspond to assault rifle ammo, because I, of course, used the prior Resident Evil games as a reference point to indicate to myself that the assault rifle uses a different ammunition type than sniper rifle ammo, but I literally had to look up on Google how to get assault rifle ammunition, and then that's when I found out that the assault rifle uses sniper rifle ammunition, and I was just so confused by that. I just don't understand why out of the blue they decided to favor this choice. It's almost as bizarre as in the Shadows of Rose DLC, where in the final boss fight against Miranda, if you do not have tooltips on, you are not going to be aware of Rose's abilities and be able to fight Miranda effectively. I always have my tooltips on, so I already knew at the time of my blind playthrough that Rose had access to new abilities during the final boss fight against Miranda. But a lot of other people who don't play with tooltips didn't even know about Rose's abilities, and so they had a bad time against Miranda. And, you know, it's that kind of scenario that feels similar to the whole scenario of sniper rifle ammunition and assault rifle ammunition being the same out of the blue. Like, I don't really understand what they were thinking with that. It's almost like Q&A was just handled by a different set of individuals who have never played the Resident Evil game, and these developers apparently have never played a Resident Evil game before, so somehow they were unaware of the fact that the previous Resident Evil games never, ever put rifle ammo in a generalized category so that it could be applied to not just sniper rifles, but also assault rifles. I don't know what they were thinking with that. That's such a bad design choice. It's really stupid. How is the average player expected to know that? I mean, if they refined their description of the rifle ammo better, and they just said it was compatible with assault rifles and sniper rifles, it would have been a bit better, but it still would have been so stupid for it to just appear out of the blue that rifle ammo is now generalizable to all rifle types, including sniper rifles and assault rifles, when it doesn't correspond to how the previous Resident Evil games worked. I definitely don't agree with the decision right here. But just getting back on track, use the assault rifle against the Garadors after you stun them with the flash grenade, and you'll be able to get rid of them very quickly, only requiring 2 flash grenades, and you can at least get 2 flash grenades before that moment. But yeah, what a dumb sequence. It's still a dumb sequence regardless of whatever strategy you implement. I just don't know what they were thinking with that Garador sequence. And now we have this part, so I'm put in the exact same position as where I was previously in my very first worst through a Resident Evil 4 Remilk, where I do not have any flash grenades to deal with these El Gigante, and it just feels like this sequence is mindlessly designed for flash grenades. Like, you've got to make sure that the unarmored El Gigante is on top of the blast furnace, then you've got to stun him with the flash grenade. It doesn't matter if his parasite is exposed or not, you can still drop him into the blast furnace, but you just gotta be fast about it, because if he recovers from that stun animation while you're in the middle of activating the blast furnace, he'll just cancel whatever he's doing and just back up. And even if he backs up and he's right on top of the blast furnace, because the game classes him as just being in that state, and he's invulnerable to being put into the blast furnace when he's in that backing up state, he'll just not be put into the blast furnace. It's really dumb that it works like that. But I just had to rely on a bit of luck in order to get that sequence done, and I wasn't using the exploit where you just stand behind his leg and just loop his stomp, because I just kind of wanted to try it out and just try to understand what the developers were thinking with that sequence, and I just couldn't come to any reasonable deduction as to why the developers settled for the kind of boss design that they favored with the double El Gigante boss fight in that part. And now we have the minecart sequence, which originally I liked, but now it's just a boring sequence. And I remember one of my subscribers, Juice, saying the exact same thing in a comment from long ago, and I 100% agree with him. I used to like this sequence, but now I just find it very boring now. It's nowhere near as interesting as the minecart sequence from Resident Evil 4 OG that demanded a lot more interesting gameplay. I mean, this can still be a nice change of pace from the broken sequences that you've been dealing with throughout Resident Evil 4 Remilk. But at the end of the day, this is all a pretty simple one-note sequence where you just have to take one specific path in how you deal with the enemies if you're going to be doing the sequence effectively. And once you figure it out, no damage, there's nothing really that replayable about the sequence. But I'm going to be able to take out the Chainsaw Man by destroying his cart. And the reason why I'm able to deal so much damage to him is because I shot the explosive barrels that were way above me when I was on the outer part of the minecart sequence, before I shot those barrels that were blocking the way. So if you destroy those barrels that are way above you, you'll be able to significantly damage the Chainsaw Man's cart and get rid of him very quickly. And now we have this really boring navisador section, and somehow there are less navisador here than in Chapter 10, and it doesn't make any sense. This is not how a nest works. I mean, have you seen, like, wasp nests? Have you seen those wasp nests that are inside a person's house, and you have, like, the soldiers on the outside? There aren't as many wasps on the exterior of the nest, but as soon as you go inside of the nest, that's when you see hundreds of them. And apparently that logic doesn't apply with the navisadors. Apparently there are more navisadors away from the nest than there are underneath the nest. How does that make any sense, guys? That just doesn't make any sense at all. Even though there are less navisadors here, this is still very boring, because navisadors are just very boring enemies to fight. They don't have anything interesting with their designs whatsoever. I mean, they do die fast, but I just don't find them to be interesting as the navisadors that flew in Resident Evil 4 OG. At least they died instantly when you shot them out of the air, so you never had to engage in very stale combat sequences with them when they were on the ground, because if you shot them out of the air, they died instantly. And I feel like Resident Evil 4 OG properly justified the number of navisador you were dealing with because of that mechanic, rather than favor the same tedious, tiresome loop of just knocking them out of the air and then finishing them off when they're on the ground, which really slows the gameplay down. They just favor the model where you shoot them out of the air regardless of your methodology, and they're dead. And it made for some very interesting moments with the shotgun, and it really made the gameplay stand out in Resident Evil 4 OG, just seeing this very unique mechanic that no other game utilizes. There isn't a single game, aside from Resident Evil 4 OG, where shooting enemies out of the air, regardless of your methodology, kills them instantly. Like, Resident Evil 4 OG was so clever with those kind of designs, and Resident Evil 4 Remilk just favors the very standard enemy model of just shooting them out of the air and then finishing them off when they're on the ground. It's just really boring, and when you're having to deal with this many of them, you really start to notice just how gamey the designs are, which is fighting the navisador in general. It's really dumb. And speaking of dumb sequences, we now have Krauser's stupid knife fight, and it's still just as boring as it always has been, and I just can't understand why new Capcom decided to trade out a nicely choreographed cinematic moment that showcases moves that we could never possibly replicate if we were in control of Leon, or that Krauser would never be able to do in just a general boss fight with him when we're actually controlling Leon and fighting him. Like, they decided to trade that out for just a simple encounter where we're not even seeing any cool moves being demonstrated. And Krauser's HP just varies all the time because it just varies how much HP he has. Sometimes he can take more punishment than this, and it can last for like 2 minutes. And then other times he goes down very quickly. Like, why is his HP so sporadic? Why is there so much variability in how Krauser's HP randomizes? Like, you have such a low extrema for his HP, and then you have an extremely high extrema for his HP. Like, there's so much variability in between those two values. Why? And it's only with Krauser, and it's not just in this encounter, it's also in his Phase 1 encounter in Chapter 14, his Phase 2 encounter, and I think it's also in Phase 3 as well. Like, Krauser's HP is so jacked, you just have to wonder if it's programming errors happening at this point. It just doesn't make any sense for a boss's HP to randomize to this extreme. Why even have his HP randomized? He's a boss! There's no reason for his HP to randomize. All you're doing is just confusing the player who wants to be invested in your systems by relaying all this false information to them. What is wrong with you, new Capcom? And to correct myself, Krauser's HP doesn't randomize. Apparently, his HP is always the same, but the amount of damage you deal to him randomizes every time. Why? Why is that the case? This can't be something related to the adapted difficulty, surely. I mean, I've been playing very well. My adapted difficulty level should be at the highest possible level, so there shouldn't be any variability. Although if the developers had any common sense, they would just remove the adapted difficulty entirely, or just set the adapted difficulty level to the highest possible level for professional difficulty, but I don't even think they do that. but there is just no logic as to why Krauser's HP is the way it is. And as I've already shown in my boss fight video with him, in Phase 2 of Krauser's fight, for some reason, if you get Krauser to use flash grenades after you knock him over with the laser explosives, he will take more damage than usual, allowing you to end the fight quicker. The damage difference is extreme. I don't know how this is possible, guys. Once again, New Capcom programmed this pre-alpha so bizarrely that it doesn't feel like a game development team actually handled this pre-alpha. It feels like some fan group handled this pre-alpha. And for all I know, that might be true, especially when you're considering the fantasy aspects of the Plagas just being demonstrated in this pre-alpha. Because this kind of fantastical interpretation to the BOWs literally feels like something out of a fan fiction, or out of some kind of story that some fan made up to just exaggerate upon the characteristics displayed within a game in order to make some interesting story for themselves. That's what it totally feels like. And I guess it's only further validated by how pitiful the quality of the gameplay is throughout Resident Evil 4 Remilk, because it really does reek of amateurish design, something that you wouldn't expect from a AAA development team. That's precisely why I'm saying that this pre-alpha was designed by a fan group who totally misunderstood every single aspect of Resident Evil 4 OG, rather than some AAA development team. And that's all I have to say about that. But returning to the tangent of Krauser and the laser explosives getting him to use his flash grenades, I just don't understand why the order of his attacks has anything to do with the amount of damage he takes. And talking more about the laser explosives, I've discovered some additional parameters that I didn't notice last time when I uploaded that video showcasing the confused programming on Krauser. But after some other testing, I've discovered some additional parameters to consider. So, if you're trying to get Krauser to use flash grenades after hitting him with the laser explosives, there are two things to consider. So the first thing is, you have to be within Krauser's line of sight by the time he finishes his animation of stumbling forwards or backwards. And then the second thing is, Krauser has to stumble in such a way that it doesn't adhere to the laws of physics. And what I mean by this is, take this scenario for instance. If the laser explosive is behind Krauser, realistically, you expect him to stumble forward. Well, in this pre-alpha, if the laser explosive is behind Krauser, and he stumbles backwards, and so that doesn't adhere to the laws of physics with how realistically a person will be stumbled by an explosive, that will actually get him to use his laser explosives. And in another scenario, if the laser explosive is in front of Krauser, realistically, he's supposed to stumble backwards. But in this pre-alpha, if he stumbles forwards instead, he will use flash grenades. So this is such a bizarre parameter, and once again, I have no idea why Krauser is so bizarrely programmed like this, but apparently Krauser not obeying the laws of physics is crucial to getting him to use his flash grenades after he gets stunned by the laser explosive. What the fuck is that? And it's so ironic because this honestly relates to how the flinch animations on the enemies don't adhere to the laws of physics whatsoever. The only time the enemies ever adhere to the laws of physics is when you shoot them in the leg while they're running. Because obviously it makes sense for Newton's first law to apply in that case, and it obviously makes sense for the enemy to lose their footing when they're running towards you and you shoot them in the leg, so obviously they fall to the ground. But every other flinch animation doesn't make any sense with how they work. It's all dependent upon arbitrary stun values. So isn't that quite the coincidence, guys, that the laws of physics not applying to the general flinch animations of the enemies, it also has to not apply to Krauser when you knock him away with the laser explosive in order to get him to use flash grenades. That is so bizarre. It almost makes you wonder if New Capcom prides themselves on not adhering to the laws of physics. Because if this consistent behavior with Krauser is going to be the case every time I'm using the laser explosive against him, then you have to wonder if this is intentional or not. I mean, what else could it possibly be? Like, why is Krauser so bizarrely programmed? And why are these developers so clueless as to how to properly make a AAA title? I mean, there's just so many questions I am bringing up with this stupid pre-alpha. Oh, by the way, before you activate the elevator, you'll want to activate that switch, then immediately activate the elevator, because if you time it just right, this metal ball will kill the red zealot. I mean, he isn't really that much of an issue, because he only stuns you like one time, and then he doesn't really bother you unless an enemy jumps on the platform and he tries to summon a plug out of them, and you can just knock him off with the shotgun. So it really isn't that crucial that you get rid of that red Zilla with the metal ball. But I just imagine that people get very annoyed with his chanting and also with how much he just distorts the screen, that you just try to get rid of him that way. And I don't blame you if you decide to do that. Just keep doing that. I think it's just a nice way to start the sequence. But now we have the elevator sequence, and this is all very simple. I much prefer the way this is handled in this pre-alpha than in the original version of Resident Evil 4, because putting up guardrails on each side of the platform you were on, and then also not being able to kill the enemies as they were dropping down onto the platform, and there were just so many enemies that you constantly had to waste a lot of shotgun ammo to get rid of them. I mean, it was just a really awkward sequence. Not to mention, the physics on the shotgun could kind of mess with you in that sequence, because if the enemies didn't face you correctly, like they didn't have their full body facing in your direction, if you tried to shoot them with the shotgun, they would do the incorrect knockback animations and just get knocked back a short distance rather than a larger distance, and this could make knocking them off the platform a bit more awkward than necessary. Which is why I much prefer the way the Remilk handles it, where you don't have any guardrails anywhere, you are able to deal with one enemy at a time. I mean, the crossbow guys are still a bit of a problem, and I much prefer the crossbow guys in the original version of Resident Evil 4, because at least they died after 2 shots on the elevator sequence. But, as long as you have the right weaponry and the right amount of ammo, you can easily do that sequence. It's not a problem. And we've just dealt with Salazar. He's still like one of the worst bosses ever made in the entire Resident Evil series, but at least the golden eggs allow me to bypass him entirely. Salazar in Resident Evil 4 OG is much better than Salazar in Resident Evil 4 Remilk. And the fact that the developers decided to favor the golden eggs as a cheap substitute to actual hard work put into making sure that Salazar worked as intended, that is just very feeble on so many levels. But I'm not going to go into Salazar yet again. I have my other worst throughs to perfectly convey just how badly designed Salazar is. And with all that said, this is the end of this video. Stay tuned for the future chapters. Thank you all for watching, and you take care now.